Good evening. Thank you all for coming. I'm T.M. Gibbons-Neff. I'm a senior in the college. I just want to take a moment and thank the Rosamny family for tonight. Without them, all this wouldn't be possible. For those who have yet to read the program, the lecture series is dedicated to Maya Rosamny's father, Mr. Salim El-Ozi, a man far braver than any of us in this room. Mr. El-Ozi was a Lebanese journalist who was killed for doing his job like so many journalists before him and since. Today, his legacy lives on by providing an inspiration and forum for future generations to continue what he loved and what he stood for. Before we get started, I also want to point out the literature you received at the door. Freelance journalist Austin Tice has been missing in Syria since 2012. Like myself, he is a Marine, and like many of you all, a Hoya. If you're interested in getting involved with the Free Austin Tice campaign, visit the Reporters Without Borders website, which should be listed on what you have in your hands. This campaign is a cause that many of us up here have followed and are passionate about. So let's get started. Tonight's event features two very prominent journalists, Chris Chivers and Tyler Hicks. Their bios are in the program that you received at the door, but in short, they've been around the world twice, talked to everyone once, been there, done that, and got the Pulitzers to show for it. Moderating is journalism lecturer and Army veteran Alex Horton. Alex, it's all yours.
Thanks, Tim. So it's good to be here on a Wednesday night, pretty much a full house, so thank you guys for coming out. So we'll just get right back into it. We're going to leave about 40 minutes for questions after this, so as we're talking, think about what you want to say. We're going to have a couple microphones here, and then we'll get to it. So looking forward to those. So Chris, Tyler, thanks for coming, guys. So I think we want to get started with ethics when it comes to war reporting. And ethics on every side of the story, when it comes to editors, when it comes to journalists, and how they need to conduct themselves in the field. So we've had some talks, and we've had some good things to say about that. So I'll start with you, Chris.
Well, we could probably spend the whole 2 hours on ethics. I mean, accuracy and ethics are probably the job. It's the whole thing. I mean, the rest is just getting there and getting back. But I mean, Tyler and I actually have spent years kind of trying to develop our own set of ideas about how to act ethically in the field, because the field presents a whole different set of circumstances than a normal or ordinary story that you might cover in the West, because everything you do or don't do in some cases potentially endangers someone else, short-term and long. I mean, you can go to a place and leave a place and your work endures online or in the community's consciousness after you've left. And so the people you're working with, you know, we call them fixers or translators or drivers or anyone who's supporting your work, any guide, any tipster can be endangered by your presence. And then you've got a responsibility to yourself. And then in certain types of reporting, and every war is different, but in certain types of reporting, you're working with combatants. And when you're moving with combatants in areas where they could become active and live, where violence could happen, you have a responsibility not to endanger them. And you have a responsibility not through your actions to have them taking risks that they wouldn't take. So here's like an example. You could be out on a patrol with fill in the blank. It could be a rebel unit, it could be an American Marine unit, and you see something you'd like to see more closely. Say you're 100 yards away from it, but you don't go there, because that's influencing the patrol. That group is going where it's going while you cover them. If you say, you know, I'd like to go check that out, and you go over there, from that moment forward, from the moment you've diverted the activity or the direction or the decisions of the people you're with, if anything happens, it's on your soul. And so we spent a lot of time over the years talking through that and trying to moderate your behavior, and in some cases even containing your curiosity, your natural instincts, in a way not to endanger another person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that expanding on what Chris is talking about, it's these types of things are not things that they really teach you in journalism school, as far as the field experience that really solidifies the points that Chris is making. I mean, like so much of the stuff that I've learned about, you know, how different cultures operate, what the rules of those cultures are, and also about kind of how to work in the field to protect ourselves, to protect, Chris and I have to protect each other, and like he said, the translators, the drivers, and it's just, these things happen, you learn through experience. I've had, some pretty bad experiences in the field and have made mistakes and things that I deeply regret as far as, how I worked and how that affected other people. One example of that would be a couple years ago while on assignment, in which case a driver that was working for me was killed. A young guy who was just driving for us as a group of journalists, and that's something that kind of I have to live with now, and it does actually keep me in a place where I think differently. I have a very, very different way of working as a result of that. So it's really, I wish there was more of a way to teach people about these things. And this is part of kind of what we're talking about today, is to try to share our experiences in that as well.
Yeah, and it becomes a question like, where does this wisdom and training come from, right? And when it comes to ethics about how to get these stories and how to trust people to get out there and make good judgment in the field, it becomes a particularly interesting question in the last generation or two, when newsrooms are smaller and budgets are slashed, and foreign bureaus are smaller, and more outlets are increasingly relying on fixers, on freelancers, people who may not have that experience, but they're going out there anyway. And then the editors are putting that burden on them. So I want to get your read on where judgment comes from when it comes from the editor, and judgment out in the field when maybe you're not as well versed in these and you're kind of green and you have to learn on your own.
It's kind of hard to remember how you became what you've become, and so, some of what we do is common sense, and I don't know if common sense is intuitive or acquired. It's probably a mix, but a lot of it is mechanical. If you talk to a really good infantry squad leader, that person will be dialed in on all these basics. He may have every single person in the squad carrying a bandage in the same pocket, right? So that if someone goes down, you know exactly where to get it, or the batteries in the same part of a pack. And you develop these habits, and you develop habits that enter your subconscious, so that when you're working and you've worked with someone a long time, you don't even have to talk to them. You can look in their eye, or just with a very almost imperceptible signal, you can make decisions and adjust off of each other. And when we're working in the field, when we're at our best, and we're not always, you get exhausted and your alertness goes down and your skills kind of get degraded sometimes, and you can get complacent. But when we're in the field, we have like an enormous body of habits that we're following, like where you position the vehicle when you're going in for a quick interview, and leaving the keys in the ignition, and leaving instructions with someone. Like, we know examples of, if you'll just reach over to your driver and say, stay with the vehicle, man, keep the keys in it, have it oriented this way, be right there, we'll be gone this many minutes roughly, and we'll try to be back sooner. And that driver may not run away when the street scene gets crazy. Just having a little bit of instruction can help cement a person in place and make you and him safer. And we know a case where something happened and the driver didn't have instructions and he ran away with the keys in his pocket, and friends of ours then showed up at the vehicle trying to evade the arrival of the Taliban, and there was a vehicle with no keys in it, and they were captured. And simple instructions, and I can understand how you wouldn't give them some days, but you get complacent. Simple instructions, simple steps, almost mechanical habits can make all the difference, not just in your story, but in your life, and in like the burden that you'll carry from doing this line of work. Because I don't know anyone who's done this for a long time who's not burdened by guilt. We've all had things go wrong in the field. And it's in the math in a way. The field's violent, and it takes people, but you try to manage the math down, and when you haven't And then if something happens on the day that you haven't, you're stuck with that. That's on your soul. It's in your mind forever.
So Tyler, how do you know? Chris talks about imperceptible things that you just start to acquire over time. So when do you get to the moment where you feel comfortable that you can kind of, and Chris, we talked about this before, of how you can sense things are going to happen before they do. Like you get in sort of like this environment where you can kind of see this extrasensory stuff. Like,
Well, I wish it was always like that. I mean, you always tell yourself, like, always expect the unexpected, and then the unexpected happens when you absolutely still don't expect it, and it's just, it's the most unlikely times when things happen, and in ways that you just completely, it's rarely, Chris and I have been on some, incredible operations with the Army, with the Marine Corps in Afghanistan, particularly, where we've been on helicopter inserts where we're dropped at night into the field, and you're supposedly going into this kind of hornet's nest of Taliban and all this stuff, but
A lot of times those are the most mellow.
Yeah, nothing happens. You get there and it's like, those guys don't want to come out and fight that, and you kind of, that's the thing, like after a while you start to know, like, nothing's going to happen tonight, even though your adrenaline's going and you're all spun up about it. It's going to be like 3 or 4 days later once you're kind of set in, and it's going to be on probably something where, you're just sitting around joking with some guys and something bad happens out of nowhere. I mean, that's at least in my experience. So as far as having that kind of, in a way, I think you're saying like this kind of sixth sense of this instinct, maybe a learned instinct, would be, that would be something I'd love to have. But it's sometimes you do feel it. You just feel like, and that's a lot of that has to do with body language, how people are moving. I try a lot to gauge things about how just the body language of people. You can tell really a lot from that, and sometimes you just realize like this crowd is not good. Crowds are tend to be a lot worse, a lot more volatile and dangerous than individuals. You get that crowd mentality.
Yeah, and then you're balancing it because, you got to do some journalism out there. And all of this stuff you're doing to manage your mat down, as I said, like every war, every place in a war, every year in a war, every season in a war has its own character and different risks. And so, there was a period when we were running around in Afghanistan and there was like this much concern about IEDs. It was like zero. And we weren't even wearing anything. I mean, first aid kit would be it. And then, around 2000, I think by 2007, certainly by 2008, that it started to really shift. And then we were all kind of armored up. And then, when we were working in Libya, out in the east, and then in Misrata, there was an awful lot of indirect fire, like heavy indirect fire, the kind of stuff that Americans almost never experience, Grodd launches 40 rockets coming in, and hitting the whole block. And so for that like war, we had sort of figured out the azimuths that they were most likely to come in on, and you stayed on the opposite side of the street and you moved along buildings there. I mean, you figured out where, if you will, the ordnance shadows were most likely to be, because an ordnance shadow, may be what keeps you alive, and you kind of would be looking for them. But I'm telling you this, that all of this takes a lot of mental bandwidth, and you've also got to do your job. Tyler has to make photographs, and I have to do interviews, and I have to stop, and I would really tunnel in sometimes on ordnance identification and building like this expanding sort of personal archive I have of arms trade labels and the like that I use to sort of build my understanding of how the tools of violence move around the world and where they come from. But when I'm doing that, I have to tune everything else out because, you're down on your hands and knees working labels with a camera, using your camera like a Xerox machine and banking all this stuff that you're going to analyze over, something like the rest of your life. And when I do that, you're in a tunnel. Everything vanishes, all this stuff. And so you have to toggle between your safety concerns, which are constant, and being able to perform the reason you're out there. Because you're not out there for you, you're out there for your readers. Everything you do has to have a journalistic purpose. If it doesn't have a journalistic purpose, you should be able to say to yourself, why am I doing it? Why am I here? And walk it back to someplace safe.
So Chris, you have a background that gives you a little bit of insight on specifically like squad movements, infantry tactics. You're a Marine Corps officer in the infantry in the Gulf War. And Tyler, both of you have seen probably more combat than a lot of combat veterans too. So when you get that sense and you have that ability to kind of see these things as they're going and read the azimuth, as you're saying, there is that tension between wanting to say something and having to stay the observer. That's your job, that's your principle, that's your morals. So can you give me an example, Chris, of
I'll give you a couple. The one that we talk about sometimes is like units and bad units out there, and there's really good units and really bad units, and you end up with all of them. And there's this moment, and I can say it not guiltily, but it's just simple fact where if you suddenly are instantaneously enveloped by combat and you're with a good unit, you'll know in a second. And it's kind of exhilarating, when you watch them do their immediate action drill and you flow with them and you realize, it's exhilarating because you realize you're going to live and you realize you're going to work. There's other units that like completely seize up and bunch up and become confused, and which is natural. I'm not knocking them. That's sort of the normal human reaction to, overpowering violence and noise, is to like pause. And that can be pretty terrifying. And what Tyler and I, always say is you got to go with the flow. You can't influence one or the other. So even though you can watch a unit bunch up and seize up, you can't take over the patrol. You can't usurp the sergeant or the lieutenant or the captain. You can't. Same reason I said, once you influence it from that moment forward, if something happens, it's on you own it. And so sometimes you're on walks that you wish you weren't on, or that felt pretty good until it got weird, and then it feels really bad. But there was one, I know the one you're talking about, where I was with a Marine unit in Karma, Iraq, and I was with Joao Silva, a colleague of ours who later lost his legs in Afghanistan. And we'd been out the day before covering a raid, and the Marine we were with was shot through the head. And it shook us up pretty good. We had just been talking to the guy and walked past him like within, a minute, something like that. I don't know exactly, 30 seconds, 2 minutes. We just had walked past him. He was up in a turret and a sniper shot him. And our reaction was the only reaction that we thought we could have was to go right back out immediately on the next one. So we hopped onto another patrol the next morning at something like dawn, a little after dawn. And the patrol was, Marines here will be offended, but it was sort of a typically pointless Marine patrol. Patrol for the sake of patrolling, And to the extent that I still have any Marine DNA, I understand that mentality, but the Marines sometimes carry it to an unnecessary extreme and go with units that are too small. It's great for developing superior corporals, but I'm not sure it's a great way to keep Marines alive. And so we walked through this bazaar. The bazaar was exceptionally hostile, people looking at you coldly and running their fingers across their throat kind of attitude. This was mid-Iraq, and everyone was and understandably, very angry at everyone, including these Marines. And we came to the edge of a big neighborhood, residential neighborhood in the town, and there was a canal that went right through the town. And the canal was, 30 feet wide, 20 feet wide, looked deep, had a boat in it. And on the other side was a bunch of buildings with a bunch of windows. And there was a bridge or two, a little footbridge. Maybe one could have taken a view. It's not all that clear to me, but I remember doing a quick picture, and assessing it and saying, we should be on the other side of this damn canal. We shouldn't be on this side of the canal. And the patrol leader wanted to stay on this side of the canal, walk along a wall. And I looked at those windows and I said, we've been out a while. This whole town's full of cell phones. They're on us. When we walk down that road, we're going to get shot. And it's one of those, you have a lot of hunches out there this hunch was more powerful than most, and I just was convinced we don't want to take that left. You want to scoot across the bridge so that when the people in those buildings open up on this patrol, you're in the buildings with them right away. The Marines can do their immediate action drill and they can stop this and punish the other side, at least scare the other side off. But if we're on this side of the canal, we're screwed because that's got a boat with an outboard motor in it. We go in that, we're sinking in our armor. I mean, you can't swim that with your armor. So it was just a stupid situation, I thought, tactically, and the decision was made to walk along this side of the canal rather than scooting over the bridge. And I almost said something. I almost said, hey man, like just you and me, let's, cross the bridge. But I didn't, because you can't, because you own it. And we walked down that road and the guy who I'd been talking to a minute before got shot. I remember thinking, maybe saying, but I'm certainly thinking that I just hope it's not a machine gun over there, And it wasn't, it was a rifle. But had I then said something and said, hey, let's rethink this and cross that bridge, and if we get into a trouble, we'll be on the right side of this, of this tick. We'll be in the right position. You guys can really react to it the way you'd want to react to it as a squad of Marines. Had I said that, I would have been a complete jerk. And if nothing happened, we would have been back inside the wire, as they say, in about an hour, and the patrol leader would have been well within his rights to say, this jerk wants to run my patrol, and I would have had to leave. And that would have been an absolutely legitimate decision. And if I had said something and we walked across that bridge and a guy got shot on the bridge, I would have owned it. And probably in that situation, because I remember I told you I thought the patrol wasn't that well conceived, someone was probably going to get shot that day. But that's an example where you get into these ethical situations, and basically every decision you make is wrong. There's no, I guess the best position would be just to be completely oblivious. Then you don't, have these thoughts, you're sort of stuck with the permutations that you can think of at each sort of decision point where you're not making decisions except to keep walking.
And Tyler, you haven't had military training, but you've been around conflict to know and to see these things happen all the time. So is there something you want to share?
Yeah, obviously Chris has the formal training, and he's taught me a lot in the field as far as, he'll say, get the hell down and don't stand there, you idiot, and that kind of thing. So,
Back blast.
Back blast from RPG and that kind of thing.
Tyler loves back blast.
And generally, it's also, we want to stick together, but we also want to be separate, because I don't want to have Chris in all my photographs, or any of my photographs for that matter. So generally, if we go out on a patrol or we're doing something, even though we can usually get to each other, we try to pick very different parts of that to spread out. And actually, there's a good example of that. Something I'll talk about it for a few minutes before we show it. But we were in the Korengal Valley, and just with a very small patrol, just with a little squad going out on to check out to go and talk to some elders in a hostile village. These are the kind of patrols that you do every day, if not more than once a day. They're very dangerous. The Korengal Valley, I'm sure all very familiar with it. It's a lot of steep, deep canyons, and just plenty of places for the enemy to hide and to have overwatch on a patrol and to do something. And this is a case, actually, where Chris and I were separated, but we were separated by, again, a river. So I was on one side, Chris was on the other during an attack, and we had a complete lack of communication, of being able to talk to each other or know what was happening, and it created a very, very bad situation. But so there's a video that we put together. It's actually narrated by one of the soldiers that was on that patrol.
We were out on patrol, going through a village that we frequently and often patrol. A lot of Taliban like to fight from up in those areas.
And it was raining that day. The terrain is pretty tough anyway when it comes to walking around it. But since it had been raining, it was just slippery and much harder, especially carrying everything we were carrying. We took our normal route pretty much. We went through Babio to Aliabad, went down the Aliabad stairs, and
Yeah, we crossed a river that had a board on it. It was pretty small.
like I said, it had been raining, so the river was pretty harsh. I got across the river, took about 2 steps, and that's when
An IED went off. It was just a lot of chaos.
our instinct was to just find cover first and then return fire accurately. It was a pretty complex ambush on their part.
We finally were able to contain it and control the firefight, and we regrouped up in the upper village where we just came through, and then we finally realized that we were missing one of our guys.
Even though we were dead tired, we just wanted to get back out there and find our guy and fight whoever we needed to fight just to find them, to get him back. We ended up finding him. When we found him, it was just, we had a sense of relief. At the same time, though, it was like, you just lost a friend. You just lost a brother that you've been fighting with. So to lose D-Water was just, especially so late in the game when we only have so much time left.
I was pissed and angry at one point because it's just really hard for me, I guess. It's one of my best friends. It was just exhausting. I didn't think I was going to make it out of that one. I don't think any of us really did.
We limited the effects that they could have initially had on us when it came to how many people could have actually gotten hurt. But it stops you in your tracks, makes you just think about things, makes you appreciate life. It stops your motivation for a little. We continue to do what we need to do because this is our job, and we love doing what we do.
So anyway, yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so that day we had split up, I remember, because when we were at our best, and probably won't be like that again, 'cause we're both kind of older and maybe not as physical as we were even a few years ago, we could move through a patrol and not interfere with the patrol, which was a big part of our code, but not interfere with each other too. So you have, it's kind of like playing hockey with someone and you have the puck and you know where that guy's going before you move the puck. And you can put the puck somewhere and he'll turn up at it because you knew it, that he was going to be there. If you've worked with someone long enough, it's the same thing. We can move through a patrol. And I had been in the front of that patrol for a while. Well, the guy who's here, John's here. And I think Tyler gave me a wink or something. He really wanted to take pictures of the guys going over the bridge. So I held back, and I watch. I have to know where he's going to go because the lens is like a cone, and I have to stay out of his cone. So if you ever saw us working together, I'm always keeping behind his shoulder a little bit. And then when he wants to really expand his vista, and I knew exactly what he was going to do. I saw that damn log. I'm like, Tyler's going to go across the river and take pictures of the guys walking across until he gets one he likes. And so I said, I got to now back up like 50 yards because if I'm standing there sucking my thumb on the other side of the bridge, all of his pictures suck, So that's basically my thought process. And I moved back and got around the corner, and I was with John right there, I think, right? You were there. And the radio set up there, and that was the perfect place because that's where the lieutenant would be, which is also where I sometimes tend to gravitate just because of my training. So that's where you'd be because you can look at the machine guns on the Overwatch. There's a first bridge. You keep track of the guys coming across there, and you could watch the guys crossing the other side. It's like the natural place for the lieutenant and the radio operator to set up. So I kind of took a knee there, and that IED went off, and I had my microphone going. That was all taken off a little handheld video camera. And I watched Tyler go across and take a few pictures, and I was just waiting. I figure he'll shoot 3 or 4 guys, he'll be satisfied, and he has his way, he moves his body when he's got it, and he'll turn, and then I'll follow him over the bridge. And it didn't happen because that bomb went off. And I stayed with John for the rest of that fight, and Tyler swam across the river and almost drowned with the guy who was talking, Soto, and destroyed his camera in the process. And I knew he destroyed his camera because I saw him, his head come up and his head go down, his head come up, and his camera never came up. So I knew there's no camera in this equation. So a few minutes later, I ran back across the other bridge and gave him that little $5 camera I had, which most of those pictures were probably shot with.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, so, I mean, that was one of those, as a photographer, you know, you're at, there's this incredible fight going on, and I found myself unable to do my job, unable to take pictures, you know, and it takes a lot to go out there, you know, physically, emotionally, to put yourself in that place. You know, months of planning go into it, and then you know you want to document what's happening. You want to have a record of, especially when there's been a casualty, because you know these guys deserve to have their story told, to have their this work that they're doing shown, and both then and also, you know, years later. I don't know, what was that?
A record needs to be made.
We're sitting here talking about something that was a couple hours, but that we can still discuss this, and some value can come from that. And that's kind of, you know, the lasting impression of these you know, these punctuated times within over years of work, that you have these specific little things that have happened that kind of define your experience there, and also the document that you were, you know, at least hopeful to leave behind. But yeah, that was like, you know, one of the worst nights of my life. I mean, I think for both of us, it was you become at least familiar with the people around you, the other, you know, whether they're soldiers or Marines, you become, you know, you have conversations with them, you have meals with them. And obviously we didn't train with these people. We didn't, you know, we haven't spent months and months with them. It's a much different and more emotional experience for them when something like that happens. But we're human, you know, we're affected by it too. And that was a really long night. And I remember getting back to, finally, when we reached back to where we were staying, it was very far. And we were just, you know, looked at ourselves, we're just covered in mud and exhausted and bruised and wet. And, you know, it really makes you think about how these guys, you know, we get to go home, we get to do our stories and leave. These guys have to continue to go out on those patrols every day.
Yeah, and that was interesting too, to get back to ethics, because Tyler came across that river, and it was cold. You can tell from those pictures. It was probably in the 40s, and the river was probably in the 30s, mid-30s, because it was spring runoff from snow, maybe low 30s. And that presentation on the multimedia presentation, kind of compressed time. They found PFC DeWater, yeah, but they didn't find him until the middle of the night, and then carried him all the way back. And so we were out until about dawn. The whole patrol didn't get back to about dawn. John may remember, I think it was dawn. And Tyler was borderline hypothermic the whole time. And so I was working with Tyler as they were trying to find DeWater, who was in really bad shape. And as they were dealing with the emotions of that, we had an obligation not to divert any of their manpower. They needed everyone they had. He was in a tree. He'd been thrown into a tree, and it was a very, very difficult time for them. And had Tyler gone hypothermic, it would have made it worse for them. They would have had to treat him, they would have had to move him. And I spent the night with Tyler. We were just doing push-ups on the rocks and stretching, and I mean, he was soaked. And I think I had we'd left in the day, so I had like a little watch cap or something I could give him, and that was like the only thing he had on that was dry. And he was shivering and shaking, and we just tried to keep his core temperature up all night. And we thought we can't divert energy from what's going on around us, which is much more important than how we're feeling. And so, like, ethically, I don't know, you did 1,000 push-ups that night or whatever, but just trying to keep the temperature up, you know. And that became the job that night. The job was to make sure Tyler doesn't go hypothermic.
Great. So I want to shift gears a little bit and just talk about what's changed in the last few years. And you know, we've had Iraq and Afghanistan in this country for the last decade plus, right? And that's sort of been our window to conflict in the world. But then Syria happened, and Libya, and the Arab Spring, and all these conflicts. And they're shaping up in very surprising ways that just wasn't happening a few years ago. You know, TM mentioned Austin Tice at the start of this thing, where, you know, he's a member of this community. He's a veteran like you and I. A lot of people care about him, wish him to come home. And it feels unprecedented, but maybe it's not. So you have journalists disappearing. You have journalists constantly under threat now. So what do you feel like has changed since Iraq and Afghanistan got on everyone's radar, and now these conflicts in the recent years? What's going on here?
You want to take that one first, Tyler?
Yeah, in many ways, it's become a lot harder to work. We had over a decade of these, you know, two major American wars where there was actually, you know, a system was developed where you could go out, you know, there's a formal application process, and once you're out in the field, you're with the Americans, and they have, you know, they have medics, and a helicopter will come and pick you up if something happens, you know, if you get injured. And all of the technology and all the kind of, you know, it can be very uncomfortable, but at the same time, you at least have that assurance that the people that you're with support you, and they're not going to turn on you. They're not going to leave you out in the middle of nowhere. That's different now. Now we have situations, and you know, certainly in Syria, to be specific, where you can't 100% or even a much lower number than that trust completely your driver, your translator, who these people are, what their actual intentions are. So, and if you get hurt, that's your problem. I mean, you've got to carry your own tourniquets, your own bandages. Think about, you know, the fact that there are no hospitals really working. It became, even though the size of these conflicts were much smaller, hugely more dangerous if something was to happen. And we've seen that also, the trend with the amount of journalists and other foreigners who've been running around there, who've been the unfortunate ones to give the example that you know, that we're all learning from now.
Yeah, when we started with some of these places we go to, we do really detailed risk assessments. We'll show up just short of the destination and park, and put it in park for a while and sort of try to study the thing. I mean, when I remember doing hospital analysis, route analysis, all sorts of stuff, trying to figure out the way in, and we've started to travel with beacons, which are good and bad, so you can leave a breadcrumb trail for your boss so they can see where you are, and that you can hit an emergency signal if something's going wrong. We refreshed our first aid training and our trauma training, probably not as well as we should have, but we at least, we started to train some of the drivers and the translators in basic sort of, you know, immediate action steps that, you know, immediate life-saving steps you take for battlefield traumas. And then we would go through a process of writing. You know, writing is a very clarifying experience, and it's very helpful to write out what you think the risks are, where you're going. Sit down and, like, over the course of a few days, while doing other things, you may be doing stories where you are that aren't taking, like, your full attention, and write thoroughly these internal memos that Tyler and I would bounce off at Tyler and then eventually show to an editor, laying out what we thought all the risks were and what we were doing to mitigate them. And again, you become almost mechanical, you know. I mean, we would develop ways of having a chase car when we were working in certain places. I mean, just little things, always making sure you're fueled up as soon as you cross into a place. or before you cross in, making sure there's fuel in the vehicle and in the chase vehicle you might be traveling with, working on communications plans. We started to use handheld radios, sometimes traveling in separate cars, because you sometimes need to. But we'd have handheld radios, but we wouldn't talk on them because they were monitored by the other side. So we would have Arabs with us who would talk on them, because hearing English language on a VHF radio in the middle of Syria is kind of like an invitation for mortar fire. But we would think through all of this, and we would write it, and then before we do the trip, we'd thought through as many contingencies as we could have. That's not going to protect you. What it does is it builds hesitation into what you're doing. And it has a plan, so somebody's working on it if something goes wrong. And those things do go wrong, but you can't anticipate all of the risks. But we weren't doing that when we went into Iraq or Afghanistan, with Western forces. But when we go with rebels, we would really do that. I mean, I remember taking like long boat rides across Libya, 24-hour boat rides, and leaving behind for my desk like the radio frequency and call sign for every fishing and smuggling boat that we could identify that was out there. It would take you a few days to gather all that, but before we did that journey, you'd left like a map or a tether that someone, if you go missing, can hopefully pull on to help find you. And ideally, the process of doing this makes you realize there's trips you're not going to do. You write these things enough, and they start to look different. And when they're really looking different, you may be on the trip you're not going to take. I have a friend who once left a note, the "what to do if I'm kidnapped" note. And he went on the trip and he got kidnapped. And he came home, a bunch of months later. And I kind of got in his, we're friends. I won't say his name, but I kind of was very blunt with him and said, what's wrong with you, man? You're a journalist, right? You're a trained observer. You got to observe yourself. I've never written that note. If I was sitting down writing the "what I'm going to do if I get kidnapped" on this walk note, not just generally what am I going to do if I get kidnapped, but what am I going to get kidnapped doing this thing I'm doing today? That's probably the walk you don't want to take, right? Observe yourself. If you think you have to leave a note like that, why are you doing that story that way, that moment? Find another way to get the information you're seeking.
So you speak of a threshold when you're talking about your risk assessment. It's where's that line where you say, this isn't worth it? The story, the news value, it's just not there. So tell us about Syria in late 2012 and how, when the calendar flipped in 2013, that became untenable.
Yeah, well, we went through these processes in 2012, and in 2013, Tyler mentioned you can't trust all your drivers or translators, and that's true in a lot of cases, but in Syria we've been fortunate. We have some that we trust, and we've learned to trust them for good reason, and we trust them 100%, because there was a day we were supposed to be kidnapped, and the driver tipped us off very abruptly and got us out of there. And we hadn't seen it coming, Here we are talking about you do all this mechanical stuff, but if you're being betrayed and set up, you might not see it, and we didn't see that at all. And that guy got us out of there and dumped us at the border. We owe him perhaps our lives, certainly our freedom. And that was a very helpful exercise for both of us. Because afterward, you realize how quickly things are shifting underneath. And we went in a few more times after that. That was, I think, in January 2013. And our cycle was kind of to go in to Turkey and prepare for a trip, do a trip. The trips weren't very long. They couldn't be. 4 or 5 days. We would not file inside Syria. We would take everything out. We would not spend extra time there, because time is math. And math is risk. So we got out, and then we'd hang around in Turkey for another week or so, working on the stories and the videos, and we'd go home and turn back up like a few weeks or a month later with a new sort of destination inside Syria and plot it out and repeat, rinse, wash, repeat. And each time it was getting a little crazier. felt a little worse. I'm not going to say it was linear, but it just reached the point over the last trip we did, which was in, I don't know, late spring or maybe early summer, maybe the end of May or June of 2013. Before we went in, I was scared. The last dinner we had was a couple people. I remember wondering if I should do the trip. And then we went in. We had a mellowest trip we had in Syria, 4 or 5 days, went fine. I was filled with dread the whole time I was in. And then we got out. And like I said, I think there was only like one firefight, and it wasn't even much of one. It was a quiet trip, and we came out, and I've never felt so much relief. In all my years of reporting or doing anything, I'd never felt so much relief. And that was like a tipping point for me, just like I talked about my friend, like, observe yourself. I realized I was so filled with dread that something was up and that I wasn't feeling right. And I kind of regretted doing the trip, even though it went well. And I went home for a few weeks, and it just kept chewing on me. And I ended up holding up my hand and telling the paper, I don't think I can do another one of these. I'm not sure I can go in and get everyone out. So we're going to have to can it. We're done, for the foreseeable future. I'm just not going to continue. It just does not feel right. And I can't put my finger on it why, but I just don't feel right. And then we declared it, there's, sort of semi-publicly, there are chat groups of journalists who cover certain regions, and I thought ethically I was bound to tell people I wasn't doing this, like if I felt this way. So I wrote a paragraph, a couple paragraphs, a few hundred words at the most, just notifying all of my peers and competitors that we were done. That, to the extent that people thought that they were competing with us or valued our assessment and it could influence theirs and keep someone out, we kind of felt obligated to share that. So we did, and that was probably, I could go check, it probably was July of 2013. And things were going really, really bad in Syria then, and they got worse, much, much worse. And we haven't revisited that decision. We almost did. There was a point in 2014 where we were just about getting ready to go and do the assessments again to consider going back in. And then the ransom started getting paid. And I know that's a hugely controversial subject about should ransoms be paid or not paid for journalists. And again, we could talk about that for 2 hours. But in the immediate short term, there's no question that they incentivize kidnapping. And so I thought there were zones we could operate within Syria again then, and I thought we had a good crew and we could go in, get out, and do some stories. And then I saw that there'd been some ransoms paid, and we switched that off. It was like the binary switch. No, fresh ransoms means no trip, because it's just, any schmuck can grab you and sell you, and has a reason to, because they're reading the same thing you're reading, which is someone just got, a big number for selling you. So that was it. That's as close as we came. And we're not close now. We have no plan whatsoever to return to the field there.
Hey, Taylor, I want to get your take on how you read the human terrain there, how your conversations were different with folks, what people were saying when they talked to you, that sort of thing, that when you started to encounter this problem, it became clear that this was different from all the other trips.
Yeah, but really, you could feel that. I mean, Chris and I talked about it while we were there. We were saying, this is probably going to be our last trip. Like that there's
that,
not. Yeah, we had this conversation. It's not going to.
We took 3 more.
Yeah, but I mean, it's more like these incidents. I mean, one day we were in a van that we were traveling around in, and there was a demonstration. It was actually some locals who were demonstrating against the rebels who were trying to overthrow the government. It was kind of a complicated situation, but probably 100 people on the street. We were in Aleppo, and they had the black flags and all that stuff, and they were kind of on the street demonstrating, and we said, hey, what's going on? And the driver said, yeah, these guys are doing a little demonstration, and Chris and I had a quick talk, said, hey, do we want to try and check it out? And you have to have, these meetings are fast. I mean, you just we have to agree on it. If one of us says no, we don't do it. And we just both said, okay, jump out. Chris wanted to get a couple seconds of video. I wanted to get a few photographs, maybe ask what's going on, and then move on to the next thing and go photograph people in a bread line or go to the hospital or whatever else that you do kind of on these rounds that you kind of make every day. And we asked our driver and the translator, and they said, yeah, it's a little dicey, but yeah, just make it quick. Get out, do it, 1 minute, we're out of here. We got out of the car, and within 5 seconds, we realized that was a bad idea. Like Chris was saying before, a guy put his finger across his throat. The attention of the crowd immediately shifted to us. We kind of went back to the van without running to try and keep people calm. And pretty soon, they were like rocking the van back and forth, banging on the windows. We're completely surrounded. A guy got in with a gun, and we were just like, we're cooked. There's no way you're going to get out of this. It's an angry crowd. Guy just got into our vehicle with a gun, saying we can't go anywhere. In fact, he wanted us to go to their so-called base to be to clear things up. I mean, there's no base. There's no. This is. There's no police, there's no army, there's nothing. It's just a bunch of bad guys. And thankfully, I mean, what Chris was saying, these people, if you have good translators and have good drivers, they save your life. And in this case, again, they talked us out of it. It took time, the patience. My instinct is like to run, to get the hell out of there. I mean, I could feel.
No, it was brilliant de-escalation.
Pulse.
They first negotiated that we could go 100 yards down the road so we could actually talk to each other. There was all these little kids screaming in the windows. It was actually difficult to hear, and it was at this crazy emotional pitch. And they just negotiated, let's just go 100 yards and get out of the crowd and talk it through there. And once we got out of the crowd and that emotional pitch was taken away, then there actually were some negotiations. It went on for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. It wasn't that long. And fortunately, the guy with the rifle didn't want us that much. That's really the only reason we got away.
We just were running into one thing after another. I mean, Chris had to buy a jacket one day. It was like freezing cold, raining, and he just needed to get like just something to cover up. And this van full of guys showed up, or like a Toyota Land Cruiser full of guys showed up. I mean, they just looked like the appearance of them. You just like. These guys are going to grab us, and then they definitely were checking us out and moved on. And so this is at a time it was
still possible to work.
Yeah.
Still possible to work.
So I mean, bottom line is that like you get to a point where you can't work in a place anymore. We wouldn't. I mean, look at us. We wouldn't last 5 minutes in any place like you go to Aleppo right now. I mean.
Yeah, you wouldn't
the
even
two of us
you wouldn't make
together?
it to Aleppo if you look like us.
Yeah, you wouldn't make it.
Yeah,
I mean,
no
we were living in an apartment there. I mean, now today, forget it. I mean, there's no way I would go there now. It'd be irresponsible for me and everyone around me. It's literally suicide to go there now as a Westerner.
So you reach the threshold point. It's different, but you just come to the threshold point. And our thresholds have probably declined with age. I mean, I know mine has. I find it's much more simple and easy to come to a reasonable no than it was 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And I reached that no a lot. Part of it is, I mean, look, what we do is a particular thing of journalism, and all of this talk that we're having right now should no way be any way glamorizing it. It's basically a bullshit line of work. It's exceptionally dangerous. It's not as valuable as people would have you believe. It is part of a mosaic of understanding a conflict. The frontline sort of experientialist approach is an element. It's important. Combatants and tactics and weapons need to be covered, but it is no more important than covering the mosques and the schools or the work that we can't do that all of these tremendous women journalists are doing and capturing a side of the civilian conflict right now. All of this stuff gets added together. Every journalist, every institution kind of adds their contribution, and as you throw it all up on the wall, it hopefully coheres into something reasonable and useful. But, you know, the frontline stuff can disappear here and there, and it's not the end of the goddamn world. You know, it really isn't. I mean, you don't need it all the time. You can take it, you gotta like have a reasonable understanding of what you're doing. And it's not always so valuable. It's not always essential. In a modicum, it is. It's an element that is necessary, but to endlessly repeat it, and it kind of becomes the same too. I mean, that's been one of the challenges as we've gotten older, is like, sometimes you're out there and you have these experiences and you're like, yeah, but journalistically, what am I offering that people don't already know, or that I haven't already done a number of times? What here is different for the reader or for me? And all these things contribute to kind of lower your thresholds and try to find another way to show or tell a story. And to recognize that other chips in that mosaic are as valuable as the one that you've specialized in, and it's okay to do those. I mean, Tyler was a pain in the ass for years. I'd say, let's go do this. And he'd be like, nah, that's not dangerous enough, you know, that's too easy. You know, like that's not, you know, and he was really like that. And, you know, and there'd be days, I mean, I'll tell the story, I'll kind of air him out. We'd been out with the Marines and had a really intense day down in Marja in the summer of, I don't know what year it was, they all blur together, the summer of something like 4 or 5 years ago. And it was before the so-called fighting season had really gone full swing, and we'd made a good record of it, and it had been interesting in a lot of ways. And we'd come back, and I had a big set of blisters on the back of my neck because I got hit with a hot shell that went down my flak jacket. And everyone in the Marine Corps has had that happen to them once or twice, and you end up rolling around on the ground, getting laughed at by everybody else, you know. And we had a lot of work to do, right? You come back, and Tyler had a long take, hundreds and hundreds of photographs. I had video, I had a story to tell. And we watched a patrol walk out the wire, and it was classic, that's unfair to the Marine Corps, but it was poor Marine Corps thinking. It was like 5, 6 guys, it was like a fire team and a few Afghans. And I thought, you know, that's kind of nuts, because if the first burst gets you guys, what are you down to, you know? I'd rather see a full Marine squad patrolling, but they wanted to do it this way. And so I was doing that analysis, and Tyler was looking at me like, we gotta go with those guys. And I was like, Tyler, we got a story like in your flashcards right now we haven't even told yet. We gotta actually commit a little journalism here, you know? We gotta go back to the tent and like process this stuff and call the desk and get the story out there, and it's gonna take some time. And he's like, oh, we gotta go with those guys. And he watched them go off into the distance, and there was another patrol out, and there was like a Cobra shooting rockets into a tree line a few kilometers away, and it just, you know, he just wanted to go. Like, let's just walk that way. And I get it, but my attitude was, but what do we have here that you don't have in your flashcards right now? So why? And we argued that day. I was like, you know, if I have to zip you up in a body bag one day, I need to be able to tell people why.
Yeah.
And I can't tell, there's no why now, you know?
I mean, you start to feel like, I mean, even on small stories, at least for me, you start to get this sense that is the center of the universe and the most important thing that's happening in the entire world. You know, I can be somewhere and you just find yourself taking huge risks that if you could remove yourself from that for a few hours and be, you know, back suddenly, time machine back in New York or wherever at your house, and you know, see that actually not that many people are paying attention to this, and like where do you draw the line where you don't take those high risks for things that aren't going to, you know, for me, if I take a photograph, it doesn't get published. A photograph means nothing. It's not something that has any value whatsoever. What am I going to do? Take a photograph and look at it myself? I don't want to do that. I want people to see it. So if it's not being seen, there's no reason to take those risks. And even like, you know, if someone gets hurt, what happens if I get hurt and then someone gets hurt helping me? So you do have to, you know, this is all about kind of looping back to what we were saying in the beginning, is learning through experience, learning through whether that's observing the other people around you who are participants or observing other journalists who have more experience than you. And it is a difficult decision to make sometimes, because you really want to tell that story with as much, as saturated as you can, with as much detail, as much color. And it becomes, you become obsessed with it. You become obsessed with gathering that material. Yeah,
and then you try to find the thing you're not gathering. When you've gathered a certain type of material forever, like it's amazing, like what I don't read right now. Like I don't read a lot of work like the work that I did all these years, and I'm much more interested in like reading the works of female journalists, because they're going and doing things that I'm not, because they can get access and they have a different point of view. And like in my impression, I'm at this point in my career, I'm trying to figure out, like, how can I be that good? How can I be that fresh? How can I kind of find a type of material that I haven't been generating for the past 15 years? And, that's like a new challenge for me. I backed out of combat a while ago. I haven't been out since last June. I spent most of my time just investigating old chemical weapons incidents since then, trying to find different formats and different ways of covering the story, so that you're not filing the same stuff year in and year out. And I think we're going to face a real challenge over the next bunch of years. Like, I'm going to change my job in about a week, and have a different beat at the paper, slightly different beat. And, we're going to try to figure out how to not do what we were doing in 2006 or 2008 or 2012. And it's kind of hard. And that also adjusts your threshold, like I'm much less willing to be separated from my family or assume some of these risks right now for a story that feels familiar.
Okay, so we're going to revisit that point before I get to Tyler real quick, and then we'll move on to our final segment and get to questions. So we talked about risk assessment and meeting your threshold, and with your experience, Tyler, like you've learned to manage it and to take risks and to avoid them. But then something like Westgate happens, where you're just happy to be on the scene of a mass shooting. You're in Nairobi, right?
Yes.
So for any of you who remember that from last year, the Westgate Mall shooting, you probably saw some fantastic images. If you did, Tyler took them. He won the Pulitzer Prize for breaking news photography for that. So you're on the scene, you happen to be there, this enormous attack happens. You don't have the ability to make a risk assessment. You don't have the ability to say what's the news value, because you have no way, you're like in a cone of silence. So walk us through how that was different from anything else.
Yeah, and I happen to be just down the street from this shopping mall in Kenya where I'm based. I've been living there for almost 4 years now, and this is something that people had feared for a long time, that this was going to happen, and it happened. I happened to be right close by. It's just one of those things that I got there, and it wasn't immediate to decision. Actually, I wasn't even thinking about going in, and this is the kind of thing where it's kind of like what Chris says when you're catching fish. You don't leave fish to find fish. If you're getting something, don't go somewhere else looking for the same thing. And there was so much action, so much drama happening outside of this building, where people, hundreds of people were coming out with bullet wounds, and people were literally dying on the sidewalk. It was awful. And that was really a spontaneous decision where I kind of saw an opportunity to get inside. I saw a ramp that went up to an upper parking lot that I saw a couple people running down that way, and I thought, if people are coming down there, this might be an opportunity. If there's people coming out there, there's going to be a way to get in. And I really had to just, in that situation, hope for the best, really. That you're not going in with the Americans. You're going in with very undertrained Kenyan Army and police, not even underpaid, but unpaid, with very poor equipment, and it was scary. I could see, having no formal training, so many mistakes in the same way that we go on patrols, and Chris was talking about the side of the river. You want to tell them, go over there. And I could see they were not clearing doorways and walking around and exposing themselves. And I said, it's going to be 5 minutes before somebody throws a hand grenade out of one of these shops. About 70 people were killed execution style in that building that day. And it was risky. I can't deny that is, that it's a selfish act to go and do something like that and take that kind of chance. It's selfish because if something happens to me, then my family, my friends have to deal with the consequences of it. So it is kind of a shitty career in that way, and that you have to sometimes do things that are in a lot of ways selfish, and that are going to be taking risks that I don't think about. I think about my family when I take risks. I don't think about myself. I think, like, if I go do this is like, if something happens to me, it's going to kill my family, So that's the kind of thing that you really find yourself thinking about.
And he's got a capacity for learning, I can tell you that, because he called me from inside, and I think I missed the call, but I listened to the message like a few minutes later, and it was sort of a breathless message. I'm inside the mall right now and all that. And I had company at my house, and I listened to the message. I'm like, what that? And they're like, well, that's Tyler, and he's in that big mall thing right now running around. I said, he's probably, hiding behind a display of dresses or a stack of paper towels. And
good cover.
And, he came out, and he told me he'd backed out. And I was like, why? And he's like, well, I got to the last store, and I was kind of like creeping around, hiding behind a row of cereal boxes. And I left. And I thought, two things must have been happening there. One was he's learning, and two, must have had a lot of really good pictures if he's going the other way. Good enough, There's a point where you say it's good enough. I got it. I don't, there's no value in added risk. And, when you're crouched down behind a bunch of Cheerios, that might be that point.
So we'll get to the last segment pretty quick here. So, Chris, you said something about, like, you're not going to be doing what you did in 2006, 2008. You're not going to be doing what you did last year. You're changing beats, and it's going to take a change of mindset. It's going to take a change of your habits and the way you kind of conduct yourself and the way you relieve stress, maybe build up stress, right? Because you guys can't do what you do without taking it home with you, I don't think. And this is something, like, culturally we see through, like, Iraq and Afghanistan veterans somewhat, this thing, but we don't talk about it in the scope of journalists. So it's something you guys have to kind of reckon with after this. And when you change your job, it's going to be, something's going to happen. So when you bring the war back home with you, how do you cope? How do you maintain this with your family? You have kids, you have a wife. How is that something that you just contend with?
The first answer, Tyler and I will probably both give it the same one, is not well. Not well at all. But maybe better with time and help. We should probably continue on the riff of declamorization. This is not a good line of work, and it's not good for you. And I would say a huge fraction of our peer group, and we'll include ourselves in that fraction, are screwed up, The alcoholism rates, the divorce rates, the substance abuse rates, the problems with coping, and the various sort of understandable afflictions that beset people who are exposed to trauma and violence, you know, settle upon this line of work like they would in any other. And we've been lucky. We've had in our career a lot of editors, and some of them have been superior human beings who've really supported us in every way. But it's not always the case, you know. Editors come and editors go, and you largely have to do it yourself. But you know, we can get into specifics, but I'd say we're both pretty messed up, you know, and haven't dealt with it that well. And I'm not really worried about switching my job. I'm going to be doing something similar, but in a more investigative role, and more for the magazine and less for the newspaper. I think that's where I'm headed, so I won't be out as much or as often, but I'll still be out. And I'm not really worried about changing my job. I'm looking forward to it. My kids have asked me to. Life has sort of demanded that I have to. And I'm not kidding myself anymore. I can't play 19 anymore. I mean, look at me. There's just no way. You know, I can't. I mean, I just simply physically can't. Not ethically, anyhow. I mean, we were always prided ourselves in being able to handle and hang with anyone in the field who we traveled with and never slowing a unit down, not a step. And the one time I kind of did, when we were down in 2007 in a big firefight, and I got really winded doing sprints across the open to get from compound to compound. I felt so guilty about it afterward that I quit drinking, and within a few months I stopped drinking. I haven't had a drink since. And my fitness level after I stopped drinking, like, just improved a few notches right away. But I don't think we do that well with it, you know, as an industry, as a set of friends, or individually. I guess is the answer. And maybe I'm at the point now where I'm looking forward to the change.
Doug?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have kids, but you know, I have 2 dogs in Kenya. But yeah, it is hard. It's something that disrupts your life a lot, and not just, you know, it's the schedule that takes you away from your family. I mean, that's what a large part of that Chris is talking about. I mean, you go home, see his family, week later you're back out on the field again. I mean, I didn't have that problem, but it's hard. It definitely affects the way you are, and it's affected the way I am as a person. I feel like I've had, you know, I'm a very different person than I was before all this type of work. Today I would be a lot of a different person. You know, you don't feel the you know, I think you feel less entitled to have certain pleasures in life, and that starts to affect your family. And so yeah, it's a difficult transition, and it's not a joke. I mean, you know, Chris and I have both been out there. You know, it's not a glamorous thing. It's not fun. It's terrible being in these places, and you can find yourself in so much heightened stress and fear that at the time it can just be kind of like, all right, you made it, you're okay, and then when you get back, it is different. It's
Yeah, how many
those
people
things.
here have like served in the infantry or in a field unit? Or a few of you. So, I mean, it's kind of a question I've wondered about all of this is like, you know, it's very hard to switch it off. It's really hard not to be hypervigilant. It's almost impossible not to feel like violence is about to happen. And not because you're afraid of it, but because you want to be ready for it. Because you want to be standing in the right place when it goes down. You want to be a step ahead of it. You want to have sensed it coming, and you want to be ready for it. And ready has a lot of different meanings. I mean, when we're working well, all we are is finely tuned observation instruments. That's what we're supposed to be. And all this is a package that carries it and gets it out there. And so when you start thinking of your life that way, how do I get out to something really interesting and physically demanding to get to? Get there, be alert enough to anticipate what's going to happen so I'm in the right place when it does. Capture it, relate it, process it, punch it up through the sky through a satellite and get it into the New York Times. When you've done this long enough, you become so attenuated to it that you're not anything else. I mean, you shut down your life. You kind of shut down your humanity. You watch these horrible things happen, and in the middle of it, your job is to capture it. And you tell yourself, oh, I'm capturing that because it's for the greater good, but the process of capturing it efficiently, the process, like, we started to run video cameras. It means not even speaking sometimes when things are going crazy because you can't talk into your video. You start to think that you shut yourself down. And as you do that, you come home, and it's weird. Like, it's great to be home, but then you're longing for that because it's so much more intense than the quotidian day-to-day life. And you have to find sort of replacements to keep yourself hyper-stimulated. And like, the only way I can sort of stay home now, and I've managed to stay home for most of the last few years. I haven't been out all that much. I think I only did 4 or 5 trips last year. Is I have to keep myself overstimulated. Just constantly trying new things I can immerse myself in. For Tyler, it's physical fitness. I mean, look at him. He's like Peter Graves, but he's still built like a minor league hockey player. I mean, he's still in incredible shape, and that's his thing. And, other people, for me, I try I basically don't sleep. I just do, I'm learning to sleep, but I just do stuff all the time. I raise more animals than I can possibly keep track of. I farm by hand in sort of this old agrarian style. I run a fishing boat at night, almost exclusively at night, because night on the ocean overwhelms you, which is perfect, and you do all these things just so you're maybe not doing that. But we argue, and that's why I asked who served, because I remember when I was in the Marine Corps, having gone through enough training, I already was becoming this thing where you can't walk through the town square without figuring out where you'd put the machine guns, and you find yourself mentally bounding across open terrain. And, so I don't know which are the factors that influence, but it ends up taking a lot of your bandwidth up, and it's not good for you, It might be good for your readers, not good for you. And so I'm sort of looking forward to changing my job further. I've already kind of officially changing my job, but I've already been on that road for probably 2 years. But I'm looking forward to being human, or closer to human.
All right, so we're going to open it up to questions. So we're going to have 2 microphones on either side over here. So just to remind you guys, so a question is a request for information, right? With a question mark at the end. A question is not a 5-minute statement and then a 5-part question, okay? So keep your questions brief, keep them concise, identify who you want to answer, and we'll get along just fine.
Thank you. I don't know if this is on.
We can hear you.
Pardon?
We can hear you.
You hear? Thank you. Really applaud to you both. So a question. You said it's on you if you influence a decision when you're downrange, but what about when you come home, you're with your buddies or you're with the troops that you served with, and you influence them to get help? Can you step in afterwards on the mental health side? Or, just because you made these very moving remarks, war hangs for a long time, and the journalists, it takes a long time for generals to come forward and try to get help, but that makes a big impact.
Yeah, that's easy, of course.
That's easy.
That's different than
Okay, so-
helping someone is different than endangering them.
So,
Yeah,
that's
Yeah.
yeah.
So I'm in touch with a number of the people who these things we've been out on. We've become close to some of these people, and I talk often, daily, with different vets about suicide prevention issues, and we do it quietly. I'm not a real public advocate for this, but we talk about it all the time. And I know some older vets. I've got one former F-4 pilot from Vietnam who lives in my town, and I find, I mean, he checks on me.
Yeah.
Not
yeah.
all that often, but he checks me. And actually, I live off the grid journalistically. I don't live in any of the big cities. I don't live near any of the bureaus. You know, I live up in New England with my large family, and most of the people I socialize with, everyone basically I socialize with, has nothing to do with this world, and I like it. I mean, it was the point where we did the war in Georgia, the South Ossetian War. I don't know when that was, 7, 8 years ago, and I'd been around, and I'd been out on the fishing grounds at night, and then I wasn't. You know, I was gone for a few weeks, and I came home, and there was a really active fisherman near me, a charter guy, and he saw me back, and he's like, "Hey man, where you been?" And I was like, you know, and I just said to him, thinking he would know, because it was a big story for 2 or 3 weeks. I said, you know, I got called out to Georgia, and he was like, "Atlanta?" And I thought, man, that's perfect. That's like just right. I'm glad I live here. Like, I don't have to talk about it, you know? I'm going
Can
fishing.
I just ask you, where, so Alyssa Rubin is someone I used to, how is her well-being? Did she make it out of?
She's back in Paris now.
She's back, so she's
back in
she
Paris. I mean,
survived
she's
that
still struggling.
awful-
I shouldn't speak for her.
Yeah, good.
But she's working.
So you talked about some of the benefits of being embedded with the unit, you know, having the access to evacuation and so forth. But what were some of the the negative ethical considerations of being with an embedded unit? Did you ever find yourself becoming too connected with the unit and feeling your ability to tell an objective story was at risk?
I think that some journalists have criticized that process of the embed process of being having certain elements of you know, being too controlled. I actually really disagree with it. I think that we're really lucky to be able to be hosted to go out and see. You know, you can't just say I want to go here and there, and you know, every single patrol is a complete privilege to go on. I mean, to be able to go out and see these, they don't have to take you. You don't have to have this whole machine to show journalists what's going on. But that became kind of the norm, and so there weren't that many rules, and there weren't. You know, we really, there is a divide between the journalists and the unit that you're with and the people that you're with. It's not something that influences the way you work. So I find it that whole system, and I'm not just speaking like this is all some really wonderful, great patriotic thing. Bottom line is, these wars were going on, and we were able to go out and see what was happening, and that was what was important to us.
So let me take a crack at it too. I think there are risks. Sure. Where are you? I lost you. Yeah, there. I think that there are risks, and I don't know how well we've navigated them. I think you guys should be the judge of that. I think it's not quite as I often read it described, but I can only speak to my own experience, so I can't speak to the broader population. Tyler and I are kind of feral. I don't really mix that well with other people. I do my own thing. I'm very genetically anti-hierarchical. I generally don't like generals and admirals and don't spend hardly any time with them. All of my work, of which I'm most proud, has come from mostly all from enlisted guys or company-grade officers working side by side with them and sharing the risks in the field. And these people largely have been telling me for years that these wars are bullshit and they're going badly, and they're sort of counter to the official narrative. And I'm not out there to write that politically. Remember I said I'm an observation instrument when I'm at my best, and I'm trying to capture that. And you can channel some of that, and being in the field as a checks and balance provides at its best when it's working well. And this is a case for it in spite of the criticism. It can provide a check and balance against the official narrative in the capitals. It can. And I mean, there was an example in Marja where Tyler and I watched a Marine HIMARS rocket strike the wrong house and kill a whole family, or most of a family. And within hours in Kabul, they were reporting that there was a sniper in that house. There was not a sniper in that house. There was a sniper about 300 meters to the right. And there really was a sniper, and it really was a confused situation, and the maps were read wrong, and a rocket was very precisely put on the wrong house, and it killed a bunch of people, a lot of people. I don't remember the number, 9, 11, something like that. It's known among the people who were there that day as the Valentine's Day Massacre, and it was horrible. And that night, so within hours, I was getting calls saying, oh, no, officially in Kabul, they're saying this was a legit hit. And the company commander, who hadn't slept in like 2 days, was curled up in a poncho liner on the ground, sleeping in some commandeered house where people were holed up. And I went to him and said, hey man, what the fuck, this doesn't add up. Like, what's going on in Kabul? And he didn't even unzip or expose his face. He said, Saigon, 1975. That's all he said. And I said, look, what I saw that was the wrong house. He said, yeah, you saw what you saw. And he rolled over and went back to sleep. And we wrote it that way. And so, there's a lot of honesty out there, even if these wars, on balance, are not. And so I think going out there has a value, and it has the risks you're talking about. And you can tell me whether we've done well with it or poorly by going back and reading what we wrote. And, we'll stand before your judgment.
I'm going to cheat. I have 2 questions, if that's okay. But my first one is, based on your opinion, do you think it's wiser for war reporters to go with an independent publication or as an embedded journalist with some sort of division within the Department of Defense? And then my second question is, I know you mentioned that there were some regrets and it's not as glamorous as as it appears to be sometimes, but in your opinion, was it worth it?
So ask the first question again, because I don't think I understood it quite right. Independent publication versus... Independent publications go with the approval of combatants all the time.
Right,
So,
but is it better to apply initially through the Army or the Navy or the Marines or some division like that, or to go through the avenue like the New York Times or National Geographic?
But they're not mutually exclusive. So we've done this for the New York Times for a bunch of years. We do it as the New York Times, and when we work what they call unilaterally, independently out in the field often. And we're not always embedded, but when we are embedded, it's generally done, not always, but sometimes you can just hop on, but it's generally done officially. There's these damn forms by the end of Afghanistan. You'd fill out these, I don't know, you'd spend days, it seems, filling out these forms to get out there, and then you'd go back a month later, and they'd want all the same forms again. It's like they'd shred them or something, but that is an official application, and the only way to get out into the remote areas and live with and document the Western combatants was to go officially. But independent publications did it. But an independent publication also sends people out to work the field for stories without being accompanied by or covering anything military or security related. So both. I wouldn't say one's better than the other. They both happen, and they happen side by side.
Tyler, you want to take a quick stab at that second question? War's unglamorous, it's dirty, and it's shitty, so would you do it over again?
Well, it's, kind of bouncing off what Chris was saying, the process, I don't think that we have the luxury of really of the embed process anymore anyway. These wars are over. Anyone who's an aspiring journalist here, I think, has to look at this through a completely different lens. What Chris and I are discussing in a lot of ways is not really real for now, and hopefully into the foreseeable future, not relevant to the way you're going to be working as far as the embed process. The aggressive operations, patrols, and all these things are by and large over. So really, I think that for those of you who are aspiring journalists, and I mean, yeah, it's like the industry's full of a lot of great people and also a handful of bad people, but I think it's a great career. It's just different now, and needs to be approached in a way that we're still trying to figure out now, as far as this, I mean, we've kind of gone through the Taliban doesn't even seem like that bad anymore to me compared to what's out there now with ISIS and everything. I mean, we're looking around like, what? We thought those guys were bad. I mean, look at what how do you cover that?
Yeah. Like Rolling Stone embedded with Taliban once, and it was fine, right? Can't do it anymore.
Well, I'll bring this up because I've heard you talk about it. For better or for worse, social media pseudo-journalism is here, and it played a rise in Arab Spring and in Syria. And what do you think the pros and cons of that are?
Full disclosures, Kara's my nephew, or my niece, excuse me. I'm her uncle, my sister's daughter. Yeah.
Let's just make that clear. Everyone, daughter.
Highly tuned observation instrument, right? Look at me. Yeah, social media is something I got into sideways and accidentally. I mean, I had a book coming out, and Simon & Schuster told me I needed to sign up for all these social media accounts in order to promote the book. And I had someone, I didn't even know how to do it. So around about 2010, someone helped me. A few guys helped me. Actually, an advertising agency helped me. It was very nice of them. And I still owe them a fishing trip for it. And they all logged on as me one day and kind of handed me the passwords like a set of keys and said, you now have a bunch of accounts, figure out how to use them. And that was in 2010, and I found them immediately very useful. I had a Tumblr, a Twitter account, a Facebook account, and journalistically I found them really useful. They've been, especially the Tumblr in a weird way, because I pretty quickly stopped doing any book promotion and just started to write quirky things from the field. And an enormous number of sources arrived. All sorts of people started to contact me, because they found that writing more raw and more fresh and less filtered than what I was doing in the Times. And I ended up with a stable of people I was in a very rich journalistic conversation with, even though it didn't necessarily look like journalism was happening as I understood it. And we started doing a lot of stuff on odd arms identification and arms trade, small facts related to the arms trade, and building sort of a body of these facts and making them point towards some fairly simple and rudimentary analysis. But there wasn't any of this really online. There was actually a lot of it online, but it was kind of woollied up in newspaper stories or think tank reports and things that a lot of people weren't digesting or couldn't digest quickly, and this became a complement to that. And I found it really valuable. And then as I was figuring it out, it was exploding, and it grew exponentially way past anything I was doing. And a lot of other people started to do a very similar stuff to what we were doing. And I kind of ceded the ground to them. I was glad they showed up. They showed up at about the time I was getting a little bit bored with it. And there's now brilliant work happening on social media all the time. So I think it's valuable. It's more than valuable. It's become essential. And it will be more essential as time goes on. But it's not everything. There's a limit to what you can say in 140, right? I mean, there just is. And it's a great it's kind of like a police scanner. It's a great way if you cultivate and curate and follow the right people in the right way, you can be alert to things instantaneously that are entering a conversation that's important to you. That's all priceless journalistically. The risk is it takes too much of your attention, and you're not able to do the longer stuff. And I kind of purposefully pulled back from it about a year ago when I was really buckling down on trying to reconstruct these old chemical weapons stuff in Iraq. And there isn't anything out there on social media about that, right? it's great where it's great, but people tend to all be speaking about the same sets of things, like not just what's trending, but what's like micro-trending in these different communities that form. And that's all that's being talked about. So you can kind of get distracted by it, and you run the risk of never zagging. You're just talking about what everyone else is talking about. And so in moderation, it's perfect. You know, in like a lot of things, in excess, it's an addiction, and it's blinding.
So there's a lot of aspiring journalists in the room. So, as you said, Chris, like you kind of let the tumbler kind of grow some weeds. But if you want to take a look at that, it's a great way to visualize and to conceptualize how you see information when you're doing a story, because he'll have the story he wrote, and then he'll have like the B side of like extra information that didn't make it into the piece, but it's nevertheless useful. And he also deliberately forgot that he didn't mention his Pinterest account. So.
Yeah, I have a Pinterest account, yeah.
So if you guys are looking for wedding dresses or spring fashion, and you want to look at like cluster bombs, these are guys.
Yeah, but I use Pinterest in a particular way. Tumblr doesn't have a good index system, and I thought Pinterest could create a visual index. But then I actually forget I have it, so I don't. Sometimes I remember I have it, and I log something on there to create a visual index. But I don't think I've used that one very effectively. You know, I'm sort of a disgrace to Pinterest.
Huge fan of you both. I'm wondering, when you're in these conflict zones, do you develop relationships with local reporters, either stringers for the Times or reporters for locally or regionally based outlets?
Yeah, I mean, those are generally the best people to link up with. My last couple assignments were, well, for example, I was recently in Yemen, which is now really blowing up over the last 24 hours. A lot calmer than when I was there. But just meeting people around, go to some stadium events or whatever it is where they're having a rally or something, and really just going up and talking to them. And they're I mean, a lot of these countries are places where they're pretty insulated from the outside world. I mean, yeah, they have the internet and that kind of thing, but as far as meeting people who come to their country, so they're pretty open to talking and sharing information, and very quickly you kind of build up a network. Another example of that would be in Palestine, in the Gaza Strip, where I work a lot and was last summer. I mean, the guys and all the men and women there working as journalists are like incredible. I mean, those people are, they really go after it, and they know, when things are happening, how to get there. So yeah, the more you can be in touch with them, the better. Yeah.
I'd say a lot of our friendships are stronger there than with Western reporters, probably. I mean, maybe that's just because, like I said, we're sort of anti-hierarchical, but also because you're out to learn, right? And you learn much more from people who live where you're working than you do from people who are visiting where you're working. I mean, it's almost like axiomatic. So, yeah, we have a lot of relationships there, and we can cherish them, and we hope for more. I mean, journalists can be exceptionally tedious. Have you been listening to us for 2 hours? I mean, it's, yeah, I mean, and us having talks like this with each other is really boring. But when you go to another country and you are engaged locally, you come away with much, much more.
So first of all, I would like to say that I've never heard people articulate the way you do while speaking normally, and it's something to be admired. And I have two questions. I believe that the fact that we're all here in the room shows how society view you as successful and maybe as people who haven't failed in life. How did you, if you're out there reporting a story, how do you deal with the risk of failure after putting so much effort into it? If it doesn't go out, or if you take a photo that stays with you, how do you deal emotionally with that? And then when you reflect on your life, do you reflect on stories or do you reflect on memories? because that's for me how a journalist separates the two in his life. I mean, is your life, is that memory only worth the story you published out, or how do you think of it?
Like, one thing is, I think Chris and I have been really fortunate and really lucky to have the jobs that we have, to have the opportunities to go out to these places. And when I was a student and photographer, journalist would come to my class, I usually get depressed after they left, because I was like, how do you ever get that job? It's so hard to get a job. The reality is that you could, if you want to be out there doing it, you can be. There's just certain things to learn along the way. But once, I don't really, not everything is going to work out. Not every story is going to produce. I was just in Chad and sat for almost 2 weeks. It is actually going to be this. I just got back a few days ago from there, and it was looking like this was going to be the first assignment that I'd have for the New York Times where I never took a single photograph. 2 weeks just sitting around waiting, because basically photography is kind of illegal in Chad unless you have specific permission to do something. And we're waiting to go on this trip where they would bring us out, the Chadian army, actually into Nigeria to an area that they had just liberated from Boko Haram. But my time was running out, and I called my editor and I said, dude, I'm gonna not even turn on my camera this time. And on my last day, actually, the trip came through. But you can't beat yourself up over that stuff. It's not every. Chris and I would go. People would say every time you guys go out, something happens. Every time you go, you guys. How is it that you're always on these? All the action always follows you guys. It's not the case at all. We just go and sit there forever until something happened. So it's really just time spent. If you're willing to invest the time, eventually you're going to see something interesting.
Yeah, to answer the second question, the memories are primal and the stories fade away pretty quickly. And a great example is that multimedia presentation that was made. Tyler fished that out about an hour before we came here. It's like, oh man, we should do something. Alex was asking us for something visual, and Tyler's traveling, so he doesn't have his archive with him. So he's like, well, what do we have that's already curated? And I was like, I don't know. We did a lot of work, didn't we? Like look around online, find something, And he found that. I was working on another story. I was trying to make a deadline for the hotel around the corner here, and he found that and sent it. And he's like, is this good? And so I looked at it, and it all came back to me as a story. I have not conceived of that day as a story since I wrote those stories. But I think about that day almost all the time. So the memories are there, and the stories are, these constructs that existed while you made them, and for a short while after, until they get picked apart on Twitter, which takes 15 minutes, and then you've forgotten them. Or not forgotten them, but you've detached from them as you're working on something else. But something about that trip that may not even be in the story, settles in. And so that's what's in here. This, to me, a few hours ago was a new discovery. I was like, oh yeah, we turned that into some journalism. But I don't really remember the journalism part,
Hey guys, thanks for sharing your story. So you talked about not interjecting and what a squad's doing, trying not to intervene. And as a former squad leader, I really appreciate that. But I had to say that. Anyway, you talked about some of your medical training and familiarization with squad tactics and small unit tactics. Have you ever reached that point, though, where you're like, I need to stop, put down the camera, and help these guys out, put a bandage on the guy, maybe a tourniquet, at the Westgate Mall in Kenya? You're like, all right, there's no need to film anymore. Let's help some people out.
When we've been in situations where people were overwhelmed, which is pretty unusual, right? Most of the time, and your experience from Afghanistan or Iraq will probably confirm this, most of the time a squad that's suffered a trauma or a few traumas has it. right? And you guys are more competent than we are. So the almost fail-safe, but not fail-safe answer is no, we don't have to do that because we get in the way. There have been a few times where, yes, we've stepped in. A few times. Those are exceptionally rare. I mean, think about how overpowered your squad would have to be before you might accept that help. But we've carried stretchers with wounded guys. We've applied bandages. We've held hands of people and poured water into the mouths of people who are shot or wounded. Yeah, you're a human being first. You do your journalism as long as you can. At that point where someone might need help, it's probably time to stop the journalism. You probably have enough journalism at that point anyhow. You got it, right? So you have fulfilled whatever your mission is. But the day in which a group of people is so overwhelmed that they need your help is a rare one. There's only been a few of them in my life. And then your humanity takes over, as it should. But I tell you something, that's a good question, and if we were with your squad and we were later in our career, not early, we would have had that conversation before we went out. I mean, Tyler and I developed with time an understanding that what we were doing was so ethically freighted, so fundamentally risky in a moral sense, and so potentially dangerous to the people around us. And that there were so many obstacles to our journalistic success, and each obstacle was a reason to stop doing it, because if you can't bring anything for readers, why are you taking these risks and involving others in them? That we kind of developed something like a script, and before we went out with a new unit, we would have that, we would first go to, I don't know if we did it with John's unit, we might have. Did we?
You had a conversation about that you're just going to follow us along. You didn't want us to take you anywhere just because you were curious or anything like that.
Yeah.
So.
It got thicker than that. I mean, the typical conversation would be something like this. This is Tyler, I'm Chris. This is what we do. Here's all of our equipment. We will spread it out for you. You can see everything we carry. Here's a little bit about our background. If you have any questions for us, you can ask them. There's no barrier. We'll tell you the answer. We're going to be walking with you for the indefinite future, whether it's a week, a month. And something's going to happen probably. Let's just assume something's going to happen when we're with you. And you're not going to like instinctively what we're going to do when it happens. Because we don't orient outward, we orient inward. So when you guys get attacked, we're going to orient on you because you're the subject. So our cameras are going to swing around on you. We're going to, typically what happens is we will take a knee or drop next to whoever we're near, and then we'll move quickly to wherever something is happening, and we're going to document it. And you're probably not going to like that, so think about it. And we will not interfere with you. And we know what you're worried about. One of the many things you're worried about is that Tyler's going to take a picture that's unbelievably unpalatable of you or someone you care about deeply. You don't need to worry about us publishing that newspaper because essentially we work for a rated G, or publishing that image, because we essentially work for a rated G publication. We can only go so far. And we're not here for meat shots. We're here to capture what happens. Those pictures will get made though, because anyone who's been at a bomb knows it's impossible not to have those pictures on your flash card after you walk the ground. But that's not why we're here. We're not here to take pictures of meat. We're here to take pictures of human beings. And when that happens, we're going to orient towards you, and we understand you're going to be upset. Please don't be. The pictures are not going to go out immediately afterward. We're going to need to go back and talk to all of you and understand your experience and process what we have. We'll have audio, we'll have perhaps some video, we're going to have notes, we're going to have cameras, and we're going to share this experience with you and try to figure it out as honestly as we can. And don't make the mistake of being distracted by us, because you got a lot to do. You got a tourniquet to put on, right? You got a radio call to make, a 9-line brief to do. So don't focus on us. Focus on what you're doing, and we'll have the conversation afterward.
That's difficult to do, though, because I took Laura Logan out a few times in 2006 in Ramadi. And as much as you say you don't want to worry about the reporters you're with, you do.
Sure.
Like, how can you not? Right?
Sure.
So it was always, I have these 12 guys I'm working with, and I always want to know who the reporters have. So, you know, focusing inboard obviously makes it difficult because you want to be focusing outward. But you
That's right, and that's part of, like I said, most of the type of work we're doing, it's just a question of how morally bad it is. The outcome can be really good, but there are all these choices involve costs. It's just a matter of degree. I'm not gonna argue with you. I agree with you. You know how many reporters I had around when I was in the Marine Corps? 0. You know how many I wanted? None. So I've worn both sides. It's just kind of how it is. We have a job to do. We're going to continue to do it. We'll find people. You could always say no. Squad could say, I don't want these clowns around, and we wouldn't be around. We'd find someone who was more willing. We'd have this conversation. And then we would find, again, when it was really, working is the wrong word, but when as a system it was functioning in a way that both sides could tolerate it, we would have had these conversations before, and we would have worked through it. Now, we were in a hell of a tick with John's unit, and I don't know, tell us how we did. You were there.
I mean, I was just focused on the fight. Like, you were there, but I was just focused on the fight, and I mean, I was a little bit concerned about, Tyler, but he was with Soto across the river, so it wasn't like I was concerned about Tyler. I was concerned about Tyler and like the other 5 guys that are trapped on the other side of the river. But I mean, it turned out all right. I mean, we're fine.
Yeah, I mean, but maybe not everyone on that. I mean, that wasn't Tyler said it was a squad, but it was actually a platoon, just a small platoon, like 18, 20 guys. It was a little platoon. They'd suffered a lot of wounded, so they'd been whittled down to where they were a big squad. And I think we might have had a machine gun group with us, maybe 25 people, 20, 25. You could talk to the other guys. They might not have that same answer. Other people may have felt violated or like you, just distracted, less than violated, but certainly annoyed and resenting that part of their, fraction of their consciousness was taken up by us. It's not a perfect system. I never would argue that it is.
I got time for one more question over here.
Have you ever felt it necessary to or attempted to put your own voice in the story, use the first person, or if not, what are your feelings about having a journalist put their voice in the story?
Yeah, I've done it a few times, not so often. There's different formats, they all work. And readers have different appetites for different things. The newspaper doesn't typically allow it. Newspapering, as we understand it traditionally, doesn't, for the last few decades at least, allow for much of that. We've done it a few times. I had a friend of mine murdered in Chechnya, and I wrote about her in the first person. And it felt right that day, and I declared her a friend in the story. And that one still feels right. I've had other times where editors have asked me to go first person. I was very uncomfortable with it. And I've had a few times where it was okay. I mean, I ended up writing a long, long story about, it was a later operation with the same unit from Korengal, where they did a company-sized walk up and down these ridges, sort of one ridge back or maybe 2 ridges back from where they usually would patrol in the Korengal, and it was a mess. It was a helicopter insertion, and as typically happens in Afghanistan when Americans mass up, the Taliban picks up rakes and farms and, vanishes. And so this was, in my view, pretty quickly afterward, and John, I'll bet you agree, it was a huge waste, massive waste, they planned the thing for something like a month. They had continuous drone cover. They flew all these helicopters up there. We had the unit had helicopter gunships around. The unit kind of, I think, got lost or lost its way for a while because the train was pushing it downhill and ended up in the wrong draw. And it accomplished nothing at great expense. And I wrote a piece in which I think I inserted a little first person in that for Esquire, where the pointlessness of how we were prosecuting as a country that war was very evident to me on that whole operation. And I felt perfectly comfortable putting my name to that, and it felt essential. And here was this probably the most sophisticated infantry capacity that has ever been created in the history of humankind, with overwatch of drones and F-16s or F-18s coming and going throughout the day, with lower flying helicopter gunships, with all these highly trained grunts who'd been out there now about 8 or 9 months. They were completely acclimated to the climate. They were becoming goats. They'd been in a lot of fights. They knew how to act. They were led by ranger-trained lieutenants, and they accomplished nothing. They were like a wandering dot in a foreign wilderness, you know, and they influenced a few hundred meters around them while they were there, and as soon as they passed on, the influence vanished behind them. It closed. And yeah, I signed my name to that in the first person. And I think, you know, you'll say, oh, you know, you have to write what the military wants when you're out there. That's a bunch of bunk. I think most of those soldiers probably completely agreed with me and were glad that they had walked me along on that walk so I could say it, because they had to zip their lips. You know, I think, I don't know, you tell me, John, you know. Maybe you're in the reserves and you can't say, I don't know, but.
I think you hit it spot on.
That's a great way to end it. So a few notes before we do a great round of applause for our speakers here. I want to make a special, hold on. I know you want to do it. I want to as well. I want to make a special shout out to the director of the journalism program here at Georgetown, Professor Barbara Feynman-Tanov here. She's in there front. She's not wanting to stand up, but she made all this happen. She brought her great guests, and everyone learned here a great deal today because of her. So I want to thank our guests, Chris Chivers, Tyler Hicks, New York Times, for their great insight. There's going to be a reception outside. So thanks for all coming out, guys.
One thing? Tyler and I have one request. You've suffered through this, and we haven't asked anything of you, but we will. Could you please, you'll see that there will be some advocacy here for Austin Tice. Would you please lend your voices and your hearts and your energy to that? Welcome them. I think they're outside. And consider what the campaign is about and try to help Austin and his family and his colleagues with your voice. Thanks.